John F. Kennedy walked into that lecture hall without an invitation and without a warning. But when Professor Aldrich finished his sentence, Kennedy was already standing at the back of the room, and he had heard every single word. Cambridge, Massachusetts, October 1962. The elm trees along Massachusetts Avenue had already started turning, and the morning light was coming through the tall windows of Sanders Theater at a low angle that made the wooden seats glow amber and the dust in the air visible like something suspended in time. There were 112 students in the lecture hall that morning for Professor Gerald Aldrich's course on American constitutional law, which was one of the most attended courses at Harvard Law School and which Professor Aldrich had been teaching for 19 years with the particular confidence of a man who had never once been told he was wrong inside his own room. Gerald Aldrich was 58 years old, heavyset, with silver hair combed back flat against his skull and a pair of reading glasses he wore on the very end of his nose so that he could look over them at students he found beneath his attention. He had graduated from Yale University in 1926 and from Harvard Law School in 1929 and had published 4 books on constitutional theory that sat on the shelves of every serious law library in the northeastern United States. He was not a cruel man in the way that men who enjoy cruelty are cruel. He was cruel in the way that men who have never been challenged become cruel, which is quietly and with the full institutional support of every room they have ever stood in. The student at the center of what happened that morning was named Marcus Webb. He was 22 years old, from Baltimore, Maryland, the first person in his family to attend any university, let alone Harvard Law School. His father had worked for 31 years as a postal carrier in the Cherry Hill neighborhood of Baltimore. His mother had cleaned office buildings downtown 3 nights a week while raising 4 children. Marcus had earned his place at Harvard on a full academic scholarship after finishing first in his undergraduate class at Morgan State University. He was, by any honest measure, one of the sharpest minds in his cohort. His professors in his first year had noted his ability to hold multiple competing legal arguments in his head simultaneously and find the structural weakness in each one. He had a quiet way of speaking that some people mistook for uncertainty, but which was actually the habit of a man who chose his words with great care because he had grown up in rooms where the wrong word cost something real. He sat in the 4th row of Sanders Theater every Monday and Wednesday morning in a charcoal gray sweater his mother had sent him at the start of the semester with a note inside that said, "Work hard and come home safe." He had been called on by Professor Aldrich 11 times over the course of the semester. 7 of those times, Aldrich had cut him off before he finished his answer. 3 times, Aldrich had rephrased Marcus's correct answer in his own words and credited the rephrasing to the room rather than to Marcus. Once, Aldrich had looked at Marcus over the top of his reading glasses after a particularly strong response and said, not unkindly, in a tone that was somehow worse than unkindness, that it was a reasonable attempt for someone still getting used to this level of discourse. On the morning of October 14th, Aldrich had written a single question on the blackboard before the students arrived. The question read, "Under what circumstances, if any, does the executive branch retain the constitutional authority to act unilaterally in matters of national security without congressional authorization?" It was, as anyone paying attention to the news that week would have recognized immediately, not a theoretical question. It was October 1962, 12 days earlier. A United States reconnaissance aircraft had photographed Soviet missile installations being constructed in Cuba. The world was in the opening hours of what would become the Cuban Missile Crisis, and every student in that lecture hall understood that the man whose name was on the question on the blackboard was, at that precise moment, sitting in the White House trying to answer it in real time. Marcus Webb had his answer ready before Aldrich finished calling his name. He stood up in the 4th row and he spoke for 4 uninterrupted minutes. building his argument from the text of Article 2 of the Constitution through the precedents established by Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War and Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the months before Pearl Harbor, arriving at a nuanced position that distinguished between defensive executive action and offensive unilateral escalation, in a way that three of the other professors, who later heard about the exchange, said was, word for word, the most sophisticated student answer they had encountered in their combined 60 years of teaching law. Aldrich let him finish. He waited a full 3 seconds after Marcus sat down. Then he picked up his chalk and turned to the blackboard, and without looking at Marcus said, in a voice designed to carry to every corner of the room, that the answer demonstrated a fundamental misreading of the separation of powers doctrine and suggested that the student in question might benefit from spending less time constructing elaborate rhetorical frameworks and more time doing the basic reading. The room was very quiet. 111 students looked at their notebooks, or at the middle distance, or at the back of the seat in front of them. Nobody spoke. Marcus Webb put his pen down on the desk in front of him very carefully, the way you put something down when you are concentrating very hard on not letting your hands show what your chest is doing. The door at the back of Sanders Theater opened at that moment without a knock. The Secret Service agent who stepped through it first was named Raymond Caruso, and he had been on presidential detail for 6 years, and he moved through doorways the way men in his position move, quickly and without drawing attention, which on this particular morning was not entirely possible, because the man who followed him through the door 11 seconds later was the 35th President of the United States, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, in a dark suit and a navy tie, carrying nothing, looking exactly like a man who had somewhere more important to be, but had chosen not to be there. Kennedy stood at the back of the room for a moment. 112 students turned around in their seats. Gerald Aldrich turned from the blackboard. The chalk was still in his hand. Kennedy walked down the center aisle of Sanders Theater the way he walked into most rooms, without hurry, with the particular ease of a man who understood that his presence was already doing half the work before he opened his mouth. He stopped at the podium. He looked at Aldrich. He looked at the blackboard. He looked out at the room and found Marcus Webb in the 4th row without any apparent difficulty, the way a man finds the thing he came looking for when he already knows where it is. He said, and these words were written down by 4 different students in 4 different notebooks within the next 30 seconds. I was in the building for another reason entirely, and I am going to be late for something that matters. But I heard an answer from the back of this hallway that I want to respond to directly, because I think it deserves a direct response. He turned to the blackboard. He picked up a second piece of chalk. He rebuilt Marcus Webb's argument in 11 sentences, tracing the same constitutional line Marcus had traced, arriving at the same conclusion, and then he set the chalk down and looked at Gerald Aldrich and said, "That is also my current legal position on the matter, and I have the Attorney General of the United States in agreement." He did not say Marcus Webb's name. He did not point at the 4th row. He did not make a scene of what he was doing. He simply made it impossible for the argument to be dismissed again in that room or in any room where the story was told afterward. He shook Gerald Aldrich's hand at the podium. Aldrich's face had gone through several things during the previous 4 minutes and had arrived at something that was not quite composure, but was the best available substitute. Kennedy walked back up the center aisle. At the 4th row, he slowed for 1 step, not stopping, not making a production of it, and said to Marcus Webb quietly enough that only the students in the immediate rows heard it, "Good argument, counselor, keep building it." Then he was gone through the back door with Raymond Caruso, and the door swung shut and Sanders Theater held its breath for a moment before it started breathing again. Marcus Webb graduated from Harvard Law School in 1964. He clerked for a federal judge in the Fourth Circuit for 2 years and then joined the legal team of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, where he spent 11 years working on school desegregation cases across the state of Virginia. In 1977, he joined a civil rights law firm in Washington, where he argued 3 cases before the Supreme Court of the United States over the following 2 decades, winning 2 of them. He kept the charcoal gray sweater his mother had sent him until it fell apart at the seam sometime in the mid-1970s. He kept the notebook from October 14, 1962 for the rest of his life. On the inside back cover, in his own handwriting, were 11 sentences. Not his, the ones Kennedy had written on the blackboard. He had copied them down word for word before the chalk was erased. Gerald Aldrich retired from Harvard Law School in 1971. He did not write about the morning of October 14, 1962 in his memoir, which was published in 1974 and which covered his 19 years of teaching in considerable detail. The chapter covering the fall of 1962 was 4 pages long. The Cuban Missile Crisis was mentioned twice. The morning in Sanders Theater was not mentioned at all. Raymond Caruso, the Secret Service agent who had held the door, gave one interview in his retirement in 1989 to a small magazine that covered the history of the Secret Service. He was asked about the most unusual thing he had witnessed during his time on presidential detail. He thought about it for a long moment and then said there was a morning at Harvard that he still thought about sometimes. He did not say more than that. The wooden podium at Sanders Theater was replaced in 1981 during a renovation of the building. The blackboard was replaced at the same time. Nobody thought to note what had been written on it last. If this story reached something in you about a room where someone finally said out loud what needed to be said, take a moment to subscribe and share it with somebody who remembers what it feels like to have their work defended by the last person they expected. Tap that thumbs up for more untold stories about the human being behind the history. Tell us in the comments, who was the person who stood up for you in a room that was not built for you to win in? Ring the bell so the next story finds you when it is ready.